Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on The Great War, Greece versus Persia, Part 2. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to see the conflict that started with the Battle of Marathon really blow up. We're going to start by setting the scene here, and then we're going to talk about what's happening in the calm before the storm, that kind of that short time between the Greek victory at the Battle of Marathon and the huge war that erupts afterwards. From there, we're going to go into the War of the Worlds, what that big conflict actually ends up looking like and how that actually plays out. And then after one of the major Greek defeats, we'll have to look at a big decision. Do they stay and fight, or do they run away in flight? And then we'll conclude with a few thoughts. So let's go ahead and set the scene. Remember, this all goes back to the beginning of the Bronze Age, somewhere around 3000 BC, and for 2000 years we see the rise of civilization, the rise of complexity, monumental architecture, art, technology, writing, all these sorts of things. And that ends up collapsing during the Dark Ages, and for nearly 400 years, things get really, well, not complex. We forget how to write. The architecture becomes much more simplistic. Sites are smaller, burials are poorer, art is less sophisticated. And then somewhere in the 8th century, Greece kind of turns it around. And starting around 750, they start kind of coming up with all the different things that we begin to associate with classical Greece. And this all happens during the period that we call the Archaic, somewhere from around 750 to around 480 BC. So we see things like the development of monumental sculpture, Greek vase painting, the way that we kind of think of it, large stone temples, democracy, the origins of philosophy, all these things happened during the Archaic. Now, while things like democracy are arising in Greece, it's arising around like kind of this really contentious period of time. So there's been an attempt made on the lives of the tyrants prior to democracy, and then Sparta is trying to push up into kind of Athenian territory and gain control using their military over the kind of Athenian city-state. And in the midst of all that, we get this guy Cleisthenes, who decides, hey, we're getting rid of the tyrants, and let's give the power to the people. And that's really, very literally what democracy means. Now, over on the other side of things, across the Aegean, we see the great Persian Empire, started by Cyrus down in this little area here, and then very quickly expanding by taking over the Median Empire, and then the Lydian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and his son Cambyses is actually able to take Egypt as well. And so what we see at the beginning of the Greek and Persian conflict is nearly comical in terms of like the amount of area each of these has. So we see Greece way over here out to the west, right? The Greek mainland, the Peloponnese, Attica, Macedonia to the north. And then we see the Persian Empire take up nearly the rest of the known world. And so when you look at this, you can get a sense for how big of a deal it was that the Greeks were able to turn back the Persian army at the site of Marathon during that first conflict. Now, one of the reasons they were able to do that is because the Persians had just sent a tiny little army out there, right? 30,000 people was nothing to Persia. But what we'll end up seeing is that the next army they send is much, much different. Now, at the Battle of Marathon, right, it's 30,000 Persians versus 9,000 or 10,000 Greeks. And the Greeks are actually able to win because the Persians push forward, but they push forward a little bit too far. The Greek flanks enclose around them. And somewhere around thousands, right, 6,000 something Persian soldiers die, whereas Herodotus says only like 192 Greeks perish. Now, it's Phidippides who runs back to the city, who announces the Greek victory, tells the Greeks not to betray the city to the Persians. And this goes down in kind of the legendary Greek history, that first victory over the Persians. Now, the Greeks get really lucky afterwards. Darius is furious at the beginning of this, and he starts to raise the biggest army the world has ever seen. But before he's able to deploy that army, he actually dies in 486. And his successor, a guy by the name of Xerxes, is just a little bit less interested in attacking the Greeks. He's got to go down to Egypt and deal with a rebellion down there. And it's not until his general, a guy by the name of Mardonius, ends up talking him into the reinvasion of Greece that he actually decides to do this. But Xerxes isn't going to make the mistake that Darius made, right? Darius sent this tiny little group out to Greece, 30,000 people, a very small part of the Persian army. Darius is amassing the greatest army the world has ever seen. So, Herodotus says it's something like 500,000 people. Now, during this period of time, the Greeks kind of know it's coming. So by 483, 7 years after Marathon, they know that conflict with Persia is basically imminent. But they end up getting really, really lucky. They can't really put up a unified front because Sparta's still trying to take over Athens. They're not getting along. And so it's kind of each city-state for themselves. But the Athenians actually end up finding a whole hoard of silver. So they're mining silver and they strike it rich. And this becomes a huge decision for them. What do you do with this kind of like lottery ticket that you found? Now, most of the people say, distribute it to the people, okay? And so what you end up doing is you give each person around 10 drachmas, and everybody gets a little bit of this, this kind of lottery ticket, right? What this one guy, a guy by the name of Themistocles, does is he convinces the people, let's not each take our own portion. Instead, let's take all the money from this and invest it into a navy. Because at this time, in the late 480s BC, they're in a little bit of a conflict with a neighboring city-state by the name of Aegina. And they say, let's build 200 new ships, 200 new triremes, and that'll help us in our war against Aegina. And this is actually going to have huge consequences later on for the war against Persia. And so that's what they end up doing. They build 200 new ships, 200 new triremes, and this is going to help them deal with their kind of little conflict with their neighboring city-state. And when we talk about a trireme, what we're looking at is it gets its name trireme because it's got 3 banks of oars, 3 levels of oars on each side. The other big part of a ship is the front of it here, right? And they have this giant metal thing at the kind of front of this that in Latin we call a rostrum. It literally means a beak. And this is what you use for destroying other ships. So you got to keep in mind, right? We don't have cannons or anything like that. And so the way that you destroy another ship is that you find that ship, you row incredibly fast, and you try to broadside that ship with this big metal prow here, right? Smashing it into the broadside of the enemy ship. So the Athenians build like 200 of these. Now, the Persians at this time, right? Xerxes has amassed an army of what Herodotus says is like 5 million people, which is just an incredible number, right? That's way bigger than like the entire population of Athens and Sparta and Thebes and Argos all put together. Now, historians think it's probably closer to 1/10 of that, 500,000, but this is still the largest army the world has ever seen. But this like largeness, the size of this army comes with a couple caveats. The biggest being that it's very difficult to support. So Greece is this very mountainous area, and the city-states are pretty small. And so even if the Persians destroy these cities on their way in, they don't have enough food from those cities to support the size of this army. And what that ends up meaning is that they've got to sail their own ships kind of along the coast, keep the army near the coast, and supply their army from these ships. And so the thinking is, right, the Greek thinking is, if you can destroy the Persian fleet, you can go ahead and force the army to turn around and go home. Now, as Persia comes close, Sparta calls for resistance. They make a call to the other Greek city-states and they say, we need to put up a defense. Who is going to help us? And out of the hundreds of Greek city-states at this time, only 31 answer the Spartan call. The next decision they've got to make is where to mount the resistance. So what we've got is we've got the Persian army coming in from the east, going up north here, and then heading south through the Greek mainland. So we see the Persian army coming that direction, over the Bosporus there, and then down south into Greece. And the first option in terms of mounting a defense is at the Vale of Tempe, and this is in the far north of Greece in a region we call Thessaly. But that doesn't work too well because there's actually a well-known pass around the mountains there, so they wouldn't actually be able to contain the army. The second option is the site of Thermopylae, right? The hot gates. And this works well because it's right between the mountains and the sea, kind of really limiting the area that the Persian army could come through. And the third option at the time is the Isthmus of Corinth. So this little land-based area that connects the Peloponnese to Attica down here. And that would be a defensible area, but the problem there is that you'd have to give up the city of Athens if you're going to withdraw all your troops to the Isthmus. So what the Greeks decide to do, right, you know this, they make their stand at the site of Thermopylae. But they're kind of slow in making this decision, and so they're not able to put together a very big army to do so. And this is where we see the War of the Worlds, where the conflict really begins. So, before they actually fight the land battle at Thermopylae, they fight a naval battle. And so what we get is we get a battle in the Straits of Artemision. Right? So these are the Straits of Artemision up here near the peninsula of Euboea in Attica down here. And we see the Persian fleet sail from the east up into the Straits of Artemision. And the Greeks start to get lucky here because they have not just the 200 Athenian ships, the Persians have a fleet of over 1,000 ships. But as soon as they get there, there's a massive storm, and the Persians lose like a third of their ships, right? So hundreds of ships end up sinking in this storm. The next thing the Persians do is they decide they're going to sail south, or at least part of their fleet south, around the peninsula, and then attack from kind of both sides. But in doing that, they encounter another storm, and 200 more Persian ships are lost. And so the Persian fleet has been like vastly diminished, but they still don't think the Athenians or the Greeks are going to put up much of a resistance. But nevertheless, Themistocles is able to convince the fleet commander to attack, and what ends up happening is that there actually is a fairly large naval battle, and there are huge losses on both sides. So it's not like the Athenians win the battle, but it's also not like the Persians win the battle. But the Persians are pretty surprised that the Athenians stayed to fight at all. So we see a lot of naval destruction already, and next comes the kind of most famous battle, right, in Greek history, the Battle of Thermopylae. And what you're looking at here is a modern picture of the site of Thermopylae. The coastline has changed a bit, so kind of where you see the road out here today, that's where the old coast would have been. But it's this flat little area where the armies would have been massed. And we see the big mountains to this side, so it's difficult to actually march an army through there. You obviously can't march your land-based infantry through the water. And so you have to move all 500,000 troops through the area right here. So what we end up with is 300 Spartans along with 3,900 allies, right? So it's not just the Spartans. There are actually almost 4,000 other troops there against something like 500,000 Persians. The Spartans are led by the famous King Leonidas. And what they end up doing is they end up blocking the passageway there, right? Thermopylae stands for the hot gates, so they block the hot gates, and they wait for the Persians to attack. Now the Persians just think, oh man, the Greeks are going to see our army and they're going to run away. But the Spartans very much do not do this. They end up kind of like laying out in the sun, they end up like combing their hair, waiting for war, kind of waiting to die. Now when the Persians actually attack, they're initially defeated. So first they send their regular infantry, and the Spartan hoplites are able to turn them back. Next they send their immortals, right? That's their kind of elite infantry, and the Spartans beat them badly as well. Then they send the archers, right? This famous kind of line that the Persians tell the Spartans that their arrows are going to block out the sun. And the famous Spartan response, of course, is like, well, that's great. Then we won't have to deal with that. We'll fight in the shade. And so over the first 3 days, the Spartans win, and they win again, and they win again. And so for 3 days, this little army of several thousand people is able to turn back an army of 500,000. That all changes when we get the Greek traitor, a guy by the name of Ephialtes, who goes over to the Persian side and tells them about a secret pass through the mountains. And late at night, the Persians are able to detach a fairly large force, kill the few lookouts that the Greeks had in that pass, and then move around to the backside of the army. And at this point, the Greeks are just not able to defend both fronts. And so Leonidas knows this, and so what he does is he takes his Spartans and he says, we are staying. All the other allies, you guys go home. And all of them do, except for actually 700 men from Thespia. 700 Thespians stick around as well. And it's those troops, along with the 300 Spartans, who make their final stand. And Herodotus says first they fought with their swords. And once their swords were taken with them, they fought with their hands. And once their hands were taken from them, they fought with their teeth. And eventually Leonidas is felled by arrows. The rest of his troops are killed as well. And so it's actually the Persians, right? Even though this is the most famous kind of Greek battle today, it's actually the Persians who end up walking away victorious. Now, the Greeks have just lost, right? They weren't able to win the Battle of Artemision, but they were able to put up a fight. They weren't able to win the Battle of Thermopylae, but they were able to put up a fight. And now they got to decide what they're going to do. And the problem is that they've got to get out because they got nothing blocking Athens now. All right? So it's a straight shot from Thermopylae to Athens. And the people of Athens now kind of retreat to the island of Salamis and retreat south to the Isthmus of Corinth. And they leave the city to the Persians. And so in 480 BC, the Persians go into the city of Athens. They burn everything. There's a previous Parthenon up on the Acropolis. They burn it, right? There are lots of different statues and temples and things like that. They burn everything. And now the Greeks have to decide, are we going to retreat completely into the Peloponnese, back down into the Isthmus of Corinth? Are we going to run away from Athens, get all the way back down there? Or are we going to put up a naval fight? Because they've lost a lot of their infantry, it's got to be a naval fight. And once again, it's Themistocles. It's the same guy who argued for that fleet, and the same guy who convinced the Greeks to fight at the Straits of Artemision, who decides and is able to convince people that the right move is to engage in battle. And so what the Greeks end up doing is they end up sending a traitor over to the Persians. But this time, unlike Ephialtes, this is a fake traitor. And what this traitor says is he says the Greeks are ready to break, right? Some of them, most of them, a lot of them have already decided, hey, Persian rule isn't that bad. They're just looking for that final straw to break the camel's back, and then everybody's going to jump over to the Persian side. All right, so it's Themistocles, right, who's convincing the Athenians to fight, and it's his idea to send this traitor into the Persian camp. Now, here's a little kind of map of what this, the setup looks like at this point in time. And one of the things to think about here is that the Persians would be crazy to do this. They can go anywhere, right? They've got their fleet. They can sail anywhere. They've already got control of the city of Athens. If the Athenians retreat down here into Sparta or something, they can sail their ships down into the Peloponnese. There's no reason for them to fight. But Xerxes, right, he sees this traitor, and he hears these stories about how the Greeks are ready to break, who are ready to jump ship onto the Persian side of things. And he just can't resist trying to finish them off. And so we see the Persians coming down, right? And we see the Greeks running away. And the Persians could do anything. And yet Xerxes says, let's try to finish them off right here, right now. And this is where we see the turning point in the battle between the Greeks and the Persians. And it's at a site called Salamis. Salamis is the name of this island. We can see it right down here, just kind of off the coast of Attica. Athens is right in here. And so at Salamis, the Greeks and the Athenians take their ships and they put them behind this little outcropping here, so the Persians can't see them. The Persians then sail their ships right into the straits here, and once they kind of get here, they're surprised by the number of ships that the Greeks have. And not only do the Greeks have more ships than they were expected, the Greeks are also much better sailors, much better at fighting at sea. And that makes sense when you think of the geography of Greece, right? It's very peninsular, right? Lots of peninsulas, lots of coastline. It's very insular in the sense that there are lots of islands, right? Whereas when you look at the Persian Empire, it's mainly a land-based empire. It's huge, but it's mainly land-based. And so the Greeks are much better sailors, much better at fighting at sea. And so what we end up seeing is the Greeks ramming their ships into the Persian fleet. and hundreds of Persian ships are sunk that day. We see total carnage where a lot of the Persian sailors, right, a lot of the Persian army fighting on these ships, they can't even swim, right? So even if the Greeks' ship is sunk, they can just swim to safety. The Persians just drown. And so it's something like 200 ships are destroyed in this single day. And the big problem now is that because the Persian fleet is broken, they can no longer support their troops. And so at this time, Xerxes gets scared, and Xerxes and a big portion of the army and fleet head back to the Persian homeland. He leaves behind his general Mardonius, though, and he says, hey, just finish him off on land. We did good at Thermopylae. We burned the city of Athens. And what the Persians do, led by Mardonius, they go back to Athens. They burn the whole city a second time. And then they get ready for a decisive land victory over the Greeks. But now that the Greeks have had something good happen at the Battle of Salamis, they're able to rally more Greeks to the cause. And at the Battle of Plataea the following year, so this is kind of a little northwest of Athens, the Greeks are able to put together the largest kind of infantry army that they've ever had. So lots of Spartans and Athenians, a lot of Greek soldiers joining up to fight the Persians. And in 479, they're able to defeat Mardonius and kind of break the infantry Persian forces on the Greek mainland. The remaining troops, any Persians that survive, end up fleeing and heading back home. And on that same day that Plataea is happening here, there's a decisive battle at the site of Mikale over in Ionia, right? So Ionia is that kind of west coast of Turkey, the eastern side of the Aegean. And at the site of Mikale, it's these Ionian city-states teaming up to overthrow the Persians along the Ionian coast. And after a very, very hard-fought battle, they're able to push the Persians back. And so now Greece has eliminated them from mainland Greece over here. Greece has eliminated them from the Ionian coast over here. And somehow, Greece and these kind of little city-states have defeated the largest army the world has ever seen. So, some concluding thoughts. One is that the Greeks were not expected to win this. The Persians have put together the largest army the world has ever seen. Herodotus says 5 million. Most historians think 500,000. Either way, it's massive. But striking it rich with that find of silver, and then Themistocles convincing them to put that towards a fleet rather than distribute the money evenly to the people, gives the Greeks an advantage in terms of their navy. And even though they lose the kind of most famous battle in Greek history, right, the Battle of Thermopylae, where the 300 Spartans led by Leonidas heroically die trying to prevent the Persian forces from invading, they end up winning very shortly after the naval battle at Salamis, and that's the turning point in the war. Because the Persian navy breaks, they can no longer support the Persian troops. A big part of them have to go home, and the rest of them are defeated at Plataea on the same day that the Ionians are able to overthrow the Persians at the site of Mikale. So that is how the Great War plays out between the Greeks and the Persians. It's important to keep in mind that the Persians, it's not like their empire falls apart. But somehow, after winning in Lydia and winning in Babylonia and winning in Egypt, they get to this tiny little area of Greece, led by a bunch of like kind of totally independent city-states. And they are somehow turned away, and the Greeks are victorious in the Great War.